Yeah. Well, at least there's, now we're finally going to have.
We're going to start the meeting here. We'd like to invite all of the speakers to go ahead and sit up here in the board area since we're a little light on attendance. We've got plenty of room up here. Come on up and make yourself comfortable.
Not all the speakers,
Yeah.
the officials, the scheduled.
The schedule elected speakers.
Good, how you doing?
They're coming. They're shy. They had a man.
Yeah, it was a good, I enjoyed it immensely.
All right. Ready to begin. Ready? Here comes Mr. Berman. We've got plenty of room. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to bring this to order. For those who have not yet had the opportunity, we have a probably the most prettiest puppy sitting behind me. So if anybody needs a little bit of love, he gives good pets. Yeah. He doesn't have to say
Like
goodbye.
board members.
He just got another one right here. So we don't quite have a quorum, but more board members are coming in. This is Forest Preserve. Yeah. Ran late. It's Forest Preserve? Perfect. Thank you. Good. Thank you. All right, so it's Ms. Juby, is are more people coming, arriving? Do you know?
Yes, there are more people.
I think we're gonna have enough, otherwise,
What if?
be tough to excuse Francis if we don't think we're gonna have 13 people.
Right? Hyatt and Roth and Leonard can't come.
He's got a bank meeting. Bank board meeting. So what do we have?
So it will be for
Four, okay.
Um,
Five.
Right now we have,
There's Cheryl.
He's on the hot seat. Cheryl, what show was last one? Chris, Michelle, Vern, Dale, me, Bill. Oh, Bill Leonard's not going to be here.
In your seat?
No.
No.
well,
10. All right, so Francis, if you can just relax and listen, all right? Enjoy this. I think you're going to find it fascinating. Unless you have your laptop with you? Are you good? All right, thank you. All right, let's call this to order so we can make sure that our speakers have an opportunity to do their presentation and I get back to the rest of their day. So could you just, let's call the roll.
Alan?
Oh, Alan was there too.
Oh, yeah, she's coming, I believe.
Yeah. We'll bring them in as they come through.
Okay, Bates? Berman?
Is here.
Ready?
Doherty's here.
Davist? Ford? Gums? Iqbal?
Iqbal present.
Thank you. Juby,
Judy here.
Kenyon, he is not. Caius. Leonard. Lewis. Linder. Molina,
Molina present.
sorry, Roth. Sanchez. Silva,
Silva is here.
Strathman,
Strathman here.
Surges,
Sturgis is present online, but I did not request approval. My schedule changed. If I'm allowed, I'd be happy to stay.
No, please stay. You'll be staying.
Tarver,
Tarver's here.
I see Tepe,
Tepe is here.
Williams. Young. And Pirog.
I am here. All right, so as you come in, we'll mark you present.
Counted 7 and
We
present.
don't care where we sit.
We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is correct.
Plus you.
Right, yeah.
3 online.
So we have Mr. Doherty and Mr. Iqbal and Mr. Surges and that's it. I think that's all online. So,
Doherty, Iqbal, and Surges so far.
so we have three board members online who will be listening. Okay. So, Mr. Tarver, you haven't been here for what? Please, you can do the pledge.
Of the United States of America.
To the republic.
All right, it's
One nation
One
under
nation,
God.
God, indivisible, liberty, justice for all.
Those people who have wonderful vacations get picked on.
Alan is here.
Miss Allen, welcome. Postpone the approval of the minutes until later on in the meeting because we do not have a quorum. If we have a quorum, we can do so. If we do not have a quorum, we'll do it another day. We have no public comment that I'm aware of. Comment? So now we can get to the important part of this meeting. First of all, I would like to thank all of our guests for coming here and giving up some of your day and your time to be here today. It's an important conversation for all of us to hear. This is going to impact our regional transportation on whatever decision is made, starting, I believe, next year. The House and the Senate will start really truly discussing this, is from what I've heard. As we know, regional transportation has a great impact on not only our environment, providing clean air and access to public transportation, but also to our growing economy. It impacts resources for education for those people who are traveling back and forth to go to university. It impacts the opportunity to go and to trade schools, et cetera. Impacts the ability for people to obtain adequate health care if they have to go to a hospital or seek other healthcare opportunities. Commerce, going back and forth to go shopping. If there's a particular store you want to go, just have a lovely time in the city of Chicago, walking on Michigan Avenue, and just having a grand day, so you don't have to drive in. It also impacts cultural opportunities. So the impact is far reaching, and the better our transportation system is, the better our economy will be, and the better our growth here in this area of Illinois. The data showing, and I'm going to turn this meeting over to Jackie, but I'd like you to consider this. Transportation has the impact of bringing 75% of Illinois' economy into our region, 75%. So as that potentially is cut, so will the economy of Illinois. For that reason alone, this meeting that we're having today is, to me, of critical importance. Because how can we grow businesses? How can we provide jobs? How can we provide opportunity without having that economy growing here? So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jackie. We're in her good hands. We have, again, a number of speakers. She will introduce each one, and you can recognize them by their Kane County coffee mug that they've been given as a thank you note. So Jackie, please.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone for attending the meeting today. Good afternoon. I'm Jackie Forbes, Chief of Planning and Programming at the Division of Transportation. Today, we're going to talk about the future of transit. I'm here because my work is connected to transit and in a few different ways. In addition to my planning duties at KDOT, I'm also the Executive Director of the Kane Kendall Council of Mayors, which distributes federal transportation funding to our local communities. We also participate in the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP, different committees where we have voices at the table when we're talking about distributing funding that they allocate to our communities. I also oversee the Ride and Cane paratransit program, which provides rides for residents 65 and older and individuals with disabilities. I'm the chair of the RTA Citizens Advisory Board. I also participated in the development of the RTA Strategic Plan, Transit is the Answer, serving on the Infrastructure Investment Working Group. Today, I'm going to go over some of the changes in the ridership that we've seen after the pandemic. We're going to talk about the importance of transit. We'll talk a little bit about the PART report from CMAP, and I'll explain what that is when we get to that slide, and those recommendations for funding and governments that were included in the report. We have some guest speakers today, which we'll introduce, and they'll each have a chance to give a little bit about what they do at their different transit agencies. We'll have some next steps, and at the end, we'll have a Q&A session where you're free to answer or ask questions of us and provide input. I wanted to mention that the way I designed these slides was that it would be a resource for you. I included links to reports and information so that you can come back to it and find this information. At the bottom of certain slides, I also added page numbers because some of these are just graphics, and there's a text that goes along with those graphics if you want to learn a little bit more about what you're seeing. So let's get started. Starting with the number of trips. What you see here are the trips that have been provided in the region from 2015 through 2023. In red is Metra, yellow is PACE, and blue is PACE ADA. You'll notice that there was some decrease in ridership already starting before the pandemic. If you look at the years 28 and 2019. And then of course you see that drop off once the pandemic started and people were not moving around as much. But then encouragingly, you see an increase in that ridership going through 2023. I can tell you for 2024, that ridership is continuing to climb. So we kind of talked about this already. Why do we need transit? Here are just different things that we have access to. I wanted to talk a little bit more about that regional mobility for all. Why this is important. We're talking about folks that maybe can't drive, and they really do need access to the transit system to get around so that they can get to those different places that are listed there. We have folks who maybe can't afford a car, or they can't afford more than one car in their household. They're trying to get to jobs. Cars are great to buy, but you also have to put gas in them. You have to pay for insurance, maintenance, upkeep, those kinds of things. So not everyone has access to a car or multiple vehicles. Maybe you have two people working in a household. So transit is very important for us. I also like to mention reduced congestion at KDOT. That's what we talk about. We want a safer transportation system for people, improved air quality, and a better reliability of that transportation system so people can get to places and they know they'll get there in time and safely. So because of that shortfall in ridership, how did we manage to get through the pandemic? Well, there was federal funds that came to assist with that. So on this chart here, you see in blue is the state and regional funding and system generated revenues in blue and green. Starting in 2020, you'll notice that yellow line or chart area, which is the federal support that helped prop up our transit agencies so that they could continue providing rides for our communities. And you'll see that those numbers have continued. This data I will mention is from the PART report in 2023. Some of these numbers may have changed a little bit as we've gone into 2024, but at the time, you've probably heard this number before. In year 2026, we're looking at a $732 million shortfall because that federal funding is running out. What's important on this slide is you see in those years past 2026, that amount gets greater and greater, that there's a shortfall. That I wanted to mention also that the total amount of support that was given in federal dollars was $3.5 billion. So a lot of money did flow through to help us keep going through the pandemic, but it is running out. So now I'll talk about that PART report, or the Plan of Action for Regional Transit. This was mandated by the Illinois General Assembly and tasked the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning to put together the report. You see, I have a link there to the actual act so you can read it, but I have a clip from it in here. That bolding is my own because I wanted to show you that those are the things that it was, CMAP was tasked with doing as part of this report. So if you go through and read it, you will see all those things in there. This effort was, had a 27-member steering committee that they worked on. It did include the CMAP board and MPO policy committee members, which is our representatives, our President Brawley from Montgomery and Mayor Schilke from Batavia. So we did have also representation and a voice at the table through our committee memberships that we have at CMAP. It took them over a year to do this report. It was submitted in December of 2023 to the Illinois General Assembly. And on the bottom there, you have a link to the report so you can read all of it. So the report structure that they put together really came up in 3 different ways. The system we want. This is where they started to dream big, or you'll hear the word transformative. Well, how can we make that transit system in the area what we really want it to be? So that was something that they looked at as part of the report. Then they went into how to pay for it, that funding side. Then finally looking at the governance piece. Those were all things that were within the parameters of the PART report. So starting off with looking at funding. This is an important slide because it's a comparison of how the Chicago area receives state funding compared to other peer agencies around the country. In green is the state support. Federal is yellow. You see we don't have much here in Illinois. Local is blue, and that system generated is green. Local revenue is referring to the fare, taxes and fees. System generated is things like fare revenue, donations, and other agency generated funds. So you'll see that compared to some other peer agencies, Illinois does not contribute that much toward the entire system. Again, I mentioned I put some page numbers at the bottom of the slide. If you want to read more, this is found on the PART report on page 80. This is a little bit of a busy slide, but I think it's important. You may have heard, because of legislation that's been introduced, this figure of $1.5 billion. And where did it come from? This was one of the recommendations in the PART report if we wanted to do a transformational investment in our transit for the region. So looking here, we would have a change in blue, which is system actions. And then they provided examples for each of these different types of funding. So the example here is raising fares. We have baseline actions, full state funding for paratransit. It is not fully funded at this time. Durable sources, example, expanding the state sales tax base to include additional services, and then diminishing or stopgap sources. Again, an example is a motor fuel tax surcharge, potentially replaced by funds from new sources like congestion billing or tolling. All the different ideas that they had are found in the PART report. Some of them are also from the Transit is the Answer strategic plan that the RTA put together as well. So I wanted to show you this slide because this is where that number came from. So let's talk about the risks if we take no action at this time. The PART report states that we'll probably would need a 20% cut to operations if we wanted to, a 20% cuts in operations funding, sorry, would lead to a potentially a 40% cut in service service. And what does that mean? So then we would lose the ability for many of our riders to access things that we know are important to them. And as Madam Chair talked about, it's also very important for our economy. As she said, our region accounts for 75% of the state's GDP. And without that transit system, we will be at a disadvantage because we don't have ways for folks to get around.
We have a question?
Yes. My apologies for interrupting you. What is congestion pricing?
Congestion pricing.
You mentioned it in the previous slide as an alternative form of funds.
Yes, so the idea that during certain times of day, you could raise tolls so that they would cost more to drive during a certain time of day because you're trying to dissuade people from driving during that time. So you can do what's called congestion pricing. That's a very simplified description of it, but that's kind of the idea behind
But the flip side is we're also charging more when people are trying to get to and from work, correct?
Yeah, there is that two sides of it, but that's what it refers to.
But if they take
decide.
public transportation, there you wouldn't be
Yes.
impacted.
That's the whole point. I understand,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
thank you.
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Good question.
Still.
All right. So yeah, we talked about the economy, job access, and also I wanted to mention too that educational piece, getting folks to colleges and universities, whether they're within Kane County or they want to go downtown to a university there, they have access through the train and transit system. All right, so looking at some reform options when it comes to governance. There were 5 different ideas that were originally looked at the beginning of the PART report. You see the 2 in bold are the ones that actually they went forward with and have recommendations around. The other 3, they looked at peer region examples and analyses of the RTA system and decided not to pursue those different avenues. So they did consider them, but they are not part of that PART report. I'm going to go through a couple of slides that have a lot of information because they show these 2 different governance structures. So I'll go through them with you, but again, it's something that I hope you can go back and look at and read more about if you're interested. The current state of how the RTA is structured is that we have the RTA board with appointees from the collar counties and Cook County and the city of Chicago. I think I got that all right. And then we have each of the service boards has their own board of directors that are also appointed and represent the different areas that they serve. As far as some of the authority that the RTA has, they do put together the budget for the region for transit. So that does include the service boards. And then also has a role in some of that capital projects. It's not a very great role, but they do kind of, I don't want to say oversee, but they do some reporting on those capital projects that are there. So this first slide I'm going to show you is the option of the strengthened and re-envisioned RTA. And I started with this one because it does show some of the current functions of the RTA and how they might be strengthened. So this vision is that we would still have that regional entity board and an agency executive. The regional entity has that capital funding and financial stewardship like they currently have, but we would add things like fair policy, capital planning, funding allocation, and the regional service planning to that regional entity like the RTA is now. There would still be 3 different service boards that have their own board of directors, and they would have certain tasks that were assigned to them, but then each agency is responsible for their own HR, pension, procurement, things that you see there. So there would still be these 3 separate agencies, but there would be some more role that the RTA would take at this time. So the second one, I think, is the one that made the news more when the legislation came out, because this is creating a single agency that would actually have 1 regional board and 1 agency executive. And you can see that entity would have both those transit functions and corporate functions, administrative functions, all under them. They would have these different committees that align with the different transit agencies today, Metro, CTA, PACE, and then paratransit, but they would not have that elected board with representation from each of the collar counties. So this was the second option on there. So we did have an opportunity to provide comments, and Madam Chair did submit a letter to CMAP with our comments and what she thought. You do have a copy that was printed out. I just had a part of the letter in here. So I just wanted to let you know that we did have a voice at the table and provided some of our comments. Some of the other counties did this as well. So that's my overview, kind of a very big picture of what's happening. It's some of the facts that came out of the PART report. So we invited some guest speakers here today to talk a little bit more about each individual agency and what they wanted to share with you as far as how this is all going. Our first speaker will be Mayor Jeff Schielke. He is our Kane County representative on the PACE board. And I also wanted to mention that Melinda Metzger, the executive director of PACE, is also here. She'll be happy to answer any questions if you have some. So Mayor Schielke, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Jackie. I'd like to make a point before I begin my presentation. What you've just heard was a very concise and clear program about what's trying to be put together here. And I just want to say, I'm the one that goes with the staff to Chicago, and we have at least 3 people. Our executive director, Tom Rick, and then Tom Rick, or Carl, Tom, and Jackie. And they are probably the most highly praised and recognized staff people that are walking around in Chicago. That we got people that know the profession, and I've had people from other counties tell me, well, Batavia, Kane County's got professional people, the rest of us got politicians. And so I just wanted to share that with you, that our staff is between, you know, Carl and Tom and Jackie, they are recognized as the go-to people and the ones that really know what a transportation should be. So I just wanted to share that. I've been involved in the conversations with this because, as Jackie's just intimated, I serve as chairman of the CMAP Council of Mayors, and that is the Council of Mayors is the ones that get to tune in and offer comments and ask for money and for transportation planning and for growth in the region. So we're the ones that, and in our case, you know, the Mayor of Montgomery's with us in there sometimes, and I'm always in there. And then each county has a couple representatives that may or may not come. And we meet about 6, 7 times a year when it's time to divvy up money or talk about a big project or whatever have you. So I because I'm the chairman, I then sit on the State Transportation Policy Board, and I had the opportunity to make the motion to accept the $470 million that Barack Obama was bringing to the city of Chicago to rebuild the Circle Interchange. And I did that. There's a long story to that. You want to know, I'll tell you after the meeting, but a lot of politics float around you in there when you're in there doing this type of stuff. But in mixed with all this politics comes this thing where we're going to now try to rebuild this situation. Well, I come from a little bit different perspective because before I became an elected official in 1981, I worked for the local newspapers. And your community information director here at Kane County, I used to work with her over at WGSB in Geneva. And there's several others that were reporters. So one of the things I got to do during my time as a reporter is I got to go to cover the Constitutional Convention of writing the current Constitution for the state of Illinois. Fascinating experience. I didn't get to go to all the meetings, but I went to a few, more than a few. And what came out of there to me is that there was a definite sentiment on the table that what we needed to do was put equalized representation into Illinois. And they kept talking about this idea of one man, one vote, and that every representative district, county boards, city councils, state legislature, everybody should be in the same size district, and we should have as many representatives and that's what I think we did there was we created it. So, you know, in the case of Kane County, I don't know what the number is, but everybody that sits at this table is representing the same number of people and within a few, maybe 100 or whatever it is. So that's a good idea that came out of that. And so from that came, you know, the idea that maybe we should reform some other things. So at the state constitutional convention, one of the things they said was, let's make up a state income tax and then let us share 10% of that total pot on a per capita basis with the local governments. So that was done. And a lot of the local governments have been, you know, taking care of a lot of their problems with that money. Well, now we've somehow figured out some way that we don't have to give the city what they call the LGDF, Local Government Distributing Fund, where we don't need to give them the full 10%. Now they're getting about 7.4%. So they've taken about 25% of it and gone someplace else because the state needs the money. So lo and behold, I go in there about a year and a half ago and the executive director tells me, well, we've got to form a new committee and talk about what we're talking about today, because we've got to put this all together. And so I went into a number of meetings and your chairman here was aware that I was going in there and I would report back to her what I was hearing and whatever have you. Well, then they came up with a final report and it said that they were going to create this board that was going to govern this and that we're going to throw the RTA, CTA, Metro, and PACE out the window, and we're going to create this new thing. Well, there's a lot of problems with, I don't know what you'd have to pay somebody to be on that board to run 4 agencies with all these problems. I don't think you could pay them what you're paying them now, which is totally a part-time salary. So, that question came up. Well, nobody had an answer for that. So then we got into, well, we really need to do this. So a group of us off to the side sat down, and it was mostly of the mayors in the group and some of the county representatives. And we created a second idea that we then, at the submittal of this to the CMAP board to be passed on to the state legislature, I made the motion, and the mayor of Romeoville and the mayor of Barrington seconded my motion, that we create a second way of doing this in which we keep all 4 of the legislative boards in place, but we identify some problem issues, and certainly funding is one of them, and how we can, over the next 2 or 3 years, kind of redo things. But, trying to tell somebody that's running the buses isn't the same as somebody trying to run the trains. And it then came out that, well, some folks in the region didn't like this idea because they need more money for their situation. And it's the folks in Chicago. I mean, I guess I got to say that. That's kind of what's going on here. So we made the motion at the final, when the final vote of this was going to be taken, I made the motion, and the mayor of Romeoville and the mayor of Barrington seconded it. And we had a vote on it of the CMAP board, and they approved our motion. And one of the things we did in the motion was change this original document that said 19 recommendations, which included this dismantling of all the boards and everything, and say that we're going to submit 19 options, which then can be submitted to the groups in the area and the counties, and you can make final decisions on how to do this. Well, there were some in the room that got very upset about this, and I'm not going to name names, but I had one in my face the minute it was over with asking me just who was I to be able to make this motion. So this thing went out with the idea that we took the word recommendations out and changed it to options. So this thing now, as it goes to the legislature, I don't think they haven't taken the options out, have they?
No, it's just for discussion right now.
Right, it's still in discussion. So that's one thing I'm watching right now to see where we go with this. But, I think right now for Kane County is working pretty good. Our PACE ridership produced more than 1 million fixed ride trips during the last year. And this year it's up 9% over what it was last year. And PACE provides more than 1,000 rides a month to ADA paratransit customers. And we've got this ride-in Kane and call-and-ride system now in the PACE system in Kane County. And we're getting fabulous return. Those buses are busy all the time. And we were very successful at PACE 3 years ago to get the PACE bus able to get on the toll road because they built a extra route or extra lane on the 90 from Elgin all the way into Rosemont, so that the PACE bus can get you on at Elgin and take you to Rosemont, where you get off and get on a Metro or a CTA train and go downtown. And so that's been extremely, and you talk to Mayor Captain up in Elgin, he's a big fan of PACE because of all the things we've been able to do to increase his ridership. Now we're having conversations at the south end of the county about trying to put the ride-in Kane thing on an I-88 from maybe Sugar Grove into near on Des Plaines Avenue off the Eisenhower. There's another train station we could hook on to there, and we could again take people on the train the last half of the trip. So we've got all these ideas in study right now. And to now just come in with a new group, and what really I find very insensitive, and I know many of my fellow peers in Kane County and the mayor's group too, is this idea that we're going to have, well, I'm not sure we know how big the board is going to be, but there's going to be 14 or 15 people from Cook County and the city of Chicago, and there's going to be one each from Kane and Lake and McHenry and DuPage and Will. So I don't know how us one vote people are gonna get. Right, that goes, the one man, one vote went out the window. And I can remember one of the most passionate delegates to the Constitutional Convention about one man, one vote was the future mayor of Chicago, Richard M. Daley. And he was a big promoter of that idea, and he wanted that enacted, and it basically was. And, you know, again, he was somebody that he wanted to expand O'Hare Airport, and he did, but that was only after a lot of arguments and conversation, but it seems to be working out pretty good now. And there's just a lot of ideas that have been tried transportation wise in the region, and they haven't worked. And so I think this could be another one of those, but we'll see. But the idea that the disturbing thing is this, the political setup of this, of all these votes in one part of the region and the rest of us with our one vote, that just doesn't cut it. And I know I've talked with several of our legislators from Kane County, and Don DeWitt seems to have picked up the whip and is really working for us down in Springfield on this. So I know there are some folks that really thought this was going to sail right through, but I was kind of one of the spoilers at the room. And I've got this great staff of Kane County right behind me telling me what will work and what doesn't work. So, and I got our county board chairman here who really has been riding on top of it and keeping an eye on it. So nobody's pulling the wool over our eyes and keeping Kane County in the dark. We're about as screaming and hollering as you can get to be. And I'm proud to say that I'm one of them doing it. So thank you.
Mayor Shelkey. All right, next up, we're going to have our Metro Board representative for Kane County, Joe McMahon. We do have Jim Dewinski here as well, the Executive Director of Metra. So Joe is joining us online, and Joe, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Jackie. I'm going to introduce Jim, but before I do, just a couple of comments here. First of all, Madam Chair and all the members of the board, thank you for one, allowing me to participate remotely today, but more importantly, Metro to participate in this very important and timely conversation. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss not only our thoughts about the proposals to reform public transportation governance and address the very serious funding crisis that we will face in less than 2 years. We feel we're at the beginning of the process and much remains undecided, but Metra is open to the reforms that make sense, reforms that improve service, that cut costs, that eliminate duplication of services and costs. We're open to those changes. But one thing, and Mayor Shelkey touched on this, one thing that we want to keep in mind is that the needs of residents in Kane County are very different than the needs of, say, the citizens of Chicago. The current structure was created in part to decentralize that control and to offer a voice to make sure that our voice in Kane County is heard. And we do not want to be forgotten about our needs and the impact on our economy as changes are proposed, debated, and made to the region's transportation. Metra plays an incredibly vital role in ensuring that the residents of Kane County have access to public transit for work, for entertainment, for errands, seeing family in different suburbs, and we cannot allow that role to be diminished. I know our executive director is there, Jim Derwinski, and I'd like to introduce Jim and turn over the remaining of my time to Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, Director, and good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. I am Jim Dewinski, Metra CEO and Executive Director. I've been with Metra 28 years, not as long as Mayor Shelkey's been in business, but we just celebrated our 40-year anniversary as Metra, the Metra board. And it's interestingly enough, I was grinning as you were stating your story there, because I actually researched the Constitutional Convention as well, because of all the changes that had to occur to actually bring public dollars to these actually at the time going bankrupt railroads. We were just one component of the transit system. And then, of course, the work that the legislator had to do to create the RTA in 1973 was all part of many months of reading a lot and reading the floor debates and trying to understand what are we trying to fix today. So today I'd just like to bring up my remarks on, what does Metra do for the region, and look forward to any questions that you have. But we directly employ 4,000 plus employees through our PSA carriers and Metra itself, supporting, very good paying jobs in the region. We are at 95% of our service level compared to pre-COVID. Some of lines are actually over 100% as we've reinvented ourselves. More to come on that. We definitely have seen a rising trend in ridership, but as all commuter was affected in the country, we were hit the hardest. Our worst day was April 9, 2020, when we were down 97.5% ridership. So you take any business, you knock off 97.5% of the people coming in the door. That means you knock off a lot of that revenue, which is what the charts actually show. Commuter rail was hit differently than all other forms of public transportation, and I can speak to the entire nation of commuter rail. I'm the founding chair of the Commuter Rail Coalition that represents all commuter rail across country. I also sit on APTA's commuter rail board, and everyone experienced the exact same thing across the country. Our riders had more ability to work from home. That's what it boils right down to. The chart that Jackie showed you earlier, if you really look at the back end of the chart, I can tell you from a commuter perspective, in 2014, we started to see, it's easy to look backwards and hindsight's 2020, but you can go back and see now clearly we are losing Friday riders. The work from home started as far back as 2014 on Fridays. So every once in a while, one person gets to work a Friday, another person gets to work a Friday. Overall, that starts adding up to 1% to 2% a year. And we were seeing that trend coming into 2020, fully exacerbated by the pandemic and the ability for people to work from home. But we've recovered a lot and we continue to rise. On the weekends, we're practically at 100%. And a lot of it's our service levels. One of the things we adapted when we went into the pandemic to conserve money was we cut our schedules in half, 50% of our schedules. The ridership wasn't there. It didn't make sense for us to expend those dollars. I know it was inconvenience to a lot of people, but at the end of the day, it didn't make sense to be running trains with 10 people on them. So we pulled back until the riders started to come back, and we slowly started putting schedules back. And one of the things we did, I said, we're never going to be the same again. Everything did change. So what we looked at is, what does our partners do across the country and around the world? And they work on this thing called regional rail. So we developed what's called a regional rail model. Regional rail would be where like everything comes into one hub, and it's almost a one seat transfer to wherever you want to go. Of course, in Chicago, where we all come together in the center of the hub, we have 4 downtown stations, and they are blocks apart. We're not about to start knocking a bunch of buildings down to start connecting the railroads together. So the way we can do regional rail is tie the schedules together. So it makes sense that you're coming in from Naperville, you get downtown, and the train that goes to O'Hare didn't leave 5 minutes before you got there. So that's how we're building regional rail. So it's by schedule driven. And this exact same concept works eventually as technology and funding's available with the buses. So that unfortunately, once in a while, the bus goes to a certain area and the train leaves because the train's on a schedule. I'd love to see the day where technology ties the two of them together. With some parameters. There's got to be some firewalls in there because obviously things happen on the railroad, things happen on the roadway, but tying that together will bring us a much better customer experience. Coming in, as we were in the pandemic, one of the things we did do is we partnered with Cook County and PACE, and we launched Fair Transit South Cook. And it was an experiment where we took 2 of our lines, the Rock Island line and the Metro Electric line, and we reduced the fares by basically 50% for the entire line. We saw ridership actually come back a little faster than the other lines. And we started to talk to the customers. That's the only way you're going to learn anything, through some surveys, and saw that, yeah, the fare pricing in some cases, we had pushed people away. Commuter rail, unlike regular transit inside cities, it's distance based. And in the cities, it's time based. So that's where the big problem comes in as we continue to ratchet up over the last couple decades to make sure that we balanced our budget. We started pricing people out of those seats. And so what Fair Transit South Cook taught us during that 3-year pilot was that we had to take a look at our fares. So what we did do is we put a working group together and we actually looked at our fares in a completely open, with open dialogue by not only looking at the fares themselves, but looking at the complication of how you use our system. So we launched this February, a new fare system for the first time ever. I think it's the biggest thing we've ever done that Ford faces and touches customers. And we went from 10 zones to 4 zones. We did this with input from the public. We did this input from the conductors. We did this with input from obviously the finance people, trying to balance the budgets and figure out how we can actually get more people onto the trains. It's an experience, but again, if we're price pointing people out, then that's not a good thing. So we launched Fair Transit South, we launched the new fare policy in February, and we're monitoring the results of that. We'll be providing this first 6 months results to our board in the August board meeting. We also launched at that time bikes on trains. We opened up our bikes on trains, and that's up like 300% compared to where it was like a year ago, just because we started recognizing that everybody's not in every seat, and we were maybe a little bit too stringent back in 2005 when we put the policy in place. That's a great first mile, last mile solution. Back then, you didn't have scooters. Now you do. So bikes and scooters are a great first mile, last mile solution. No charging on the trains. That's dangerous. We don't allow that. But we are starting to see more and more and more things that we didn't see before. And through our surveys, we still see about 25% of our riders are new riders. So that's interesting, right? Because that means they're less than 1 year. That means they're trying the system out. But why aren't all the numbers there? It's because nobody's working 5 days a week anymore down in the central business district. Also, the biggest thing I think we did to really help the counties outside of Chicago is we took away the pricing that made it not competitive. And we have one price point. So in other words, we have a 4-zone system. You pay zone 1 pricing if you're going intermediate.
Oh, yeah.
So now, yep, absolutely. So if you, we were going to continue to try to market that because people going to school, going to the hospital, maybe they never thought about taking Metro because why would I pay $11? But now it's down to like $3.75. So it's not yet at the CTA rate, but it definitely is more affordable. We then launched at the same time a new program called Access. This time we partnered with the RTA in Cook County. And what it does is it provides about a 50% discount to anyone that's using the federal SNAP program. The RTA is the one that actually manages the program. But this way, Fair Transit South Cook taught us, yeah, our price point's high, but it also opened up our eyes to the fact that we're not hitting all the people in the 6-county region that maybe need that type of benefit. In the first couple of months, thousands of people signed up for this. If they're not already part of another regional program. But as a mayor pointed out and Jackie pointed out, sometimes the state doesn't pay all their sides of the bills. And so over time, we've had to make up that difference through our budget processes. So each and every year, and in my short tenure as CEO, we've almost had to fill a budget hole minus the COVID money. And people always say, well, why didn't you do this then? Why didn't you do this then? This year we launched, or we will launch later this year, the first ever regional day pass. This is what everyone's been asking for. It's the pass you can get on and you can ride the system, all 3 systems, multiple times a day. Why is that available now? It's because there's funding on the backside. Because it never made sense before if it was $2 for the Pace bus and $2 for the CTA train and then $11 for Metro. Nobody wanted to pay that $15 one way and then $15 the other way. We could never actually balance our books on the back end. So what COVID has given us, the COVID relief funds have given us, is starting to build that system the way we want it to be. And now we have to really take a look at, from a funding perspective, I keep saying this is a funding issue. This is not a governance issue. From a funding perspective, how do we make sure that the service boards aren't having to fight for that money? And that's why the fares, as Jackie pointed out, the fares up at the RTA makes sense. Let us operate the systems and let the RTA figure out what the fares need to be to balance the books with all the other funding that comes in. I'll just kind of really conclude that the regional rail model that we've launched is where we see the highest ridership gains. UP North, BNSF, Rock Island, Metro Electric. Love to do more. I said when I made my remarks to the Senate Transportation Committee, we need to think bolder, much bolder than we're thinking. Not just the transportation system that we want, but how do we start getting more control with government dollars? What a lot of people don't realize is when Metro operates a train, we're paying a freight partner to operate on their tracks. I know that the beauty of CTA and PACE is they're not paying CDOT, KDOT, IDOT. They're not paying anybody. The taxes take care of that. But we have to pay for those that's access. Now, Metro does own the Rock Island and Metro Electric and the 2 Milwaukee lines. Everything else, we're actually still having to pay to operate on those lines. And that goes back to what we talked about from the Constitutional Convention and the formation of the RTA. The railroads were going bankrupt. Back in the 60s, they were all going bankrupt under the financial burden of the passengers. And that's why they created, under the Grand Deal, Amtrak in 1972. And they were able to shed their passenger common carrier obligation away and give it to Amtrak. But nobody ever took care of what we then, back in those days, called suburban service. Now we call it commuter service, and I'm changing it to regional rail. The point is, nobody ever took care of that. So the freights won. They got rid of all their passenger obligation. The ones that still were operating passenger, like legacy systems like Chicago, the legislators stepped up and they started funding the backside of that through the RTA. And eventually, 40 years later of Metro operating, we've got these contracts with these carriers to provide services. Now, currently, one of the most exciting things we're doing is we're actually bringing over all the Union Pacific employees to Metro. We've already brought over 350, 500 more to go. Hope to have that done by the end of the year. We've always believed that they're great employees, and we believe that they would be great Metro employees, and we'd have a lot more control of our destiny with them as Metro employees. So that's happening. What's not happening is Union Pacific certainly is not selling us those tracks. They're not waving big discounts in the air saying, just come ride for whatever price you want. So there is a negotiation that we are working on with Union Pacific, not only to access those tracks and for perpetuity, but to also start purchasing some of those pieces of equipment or yards and facilities that they won't need for commuter service anymore. And that way they can become an asset of the state of Illinois. So I thank you for your time and my comments today. And I certainly look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, Jackie.
All right, moving on. We will now have our RTA board representative for Kane County, Chris Groven. And I want to mention that Leanne Redden, the executive director of the RTA, is here as well. Go ahead, Chris.
All right, thank you, Jackie. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. As Jackie said, I'm Chris Groven. I've had the honor of representing Kane County on the RTA board since November of 2018. So I'm not even in the same league as Mayor Shelkey. I'm in the same ballpark as Director Dewinski, but I did bring some powerful friends. And so behind me, you have Leanne Redden, who's already announced, as well as Rob Nash, who is the RTA's Director of Government Affairs. So tough questions, I've got friends. The RTA oversees finances, secures funding, and conducts transit planning for Metro, PACE, and RTA. For 5 decades, the RTA has been responsible for developing the system's transit operating budget and 5-year capital program, as well as the transit strategic plan. We have long recognized the extraordinary value that our transit system provides to Kane County, to Metro Chicago, and the entire state of Illinois. And investing in transit is key to growing our economy, as you've heard, protecting the environment and improving the quality of life. Today, ridership across Metro, PACE, and CTA is growing at double digits because of increased service levels as described, and with a focus now more on midday and weekend service. And this has only been possible because of the flexible COVID funding and strong stewardship of the resources available to the system. While we are on the right track, the region cannot afford to lose momentum. Urgent action is needed to address the fiscal cliff. While we have funding through 2025 for operations, we have less than a year to start making decisions about levels of service and fares in 2026. We've proven that we use the public dollars efficiently. If you look at data that compares the RTA to systems across the nation, it shows that Metra, PACE, and CTA routinely outperform their peers on key metrics like cost efficiency. And we are committed to efficient operations and oversight. To oversee transit finances, the RTA is led by a 16-member board appointed by regional leaders, such as yourselves, who reflect the diverse needs of riders. A supermajority vote of at least 12 of 16 board members is required for all major decisions, including approval of the system's annual budgets, financial plan, capital programs, and strategic plans. This focuses our board to reach consensus when faced with difficult decisions about how to distribute limited resources, and gets to the point Mayor Schilke was making earlier about the importance of maintaining our representation. Across a variety of governance structures and in wildly different metropolitan centers around the world, there is one common critical resource that's essential for success, and that is adequate funding. Funding for transit has gone up and down with economic trends, but we've never had enough funding to give all the region's residents the fast and reliable service that they deserve. RTA is working with local, state, and federal officials to explore a range of options for new revenue. We acknowledge funding alone is not enough to shore up the future of the system. Since the RTA was established by a referendum in 1974, we've gone through multiple periods of reform. You've heard about some of that as well. In each instance, the legislature empowered the RTA to boost resources collected from our region and linked that funding to reforms designed to increase efficiency and accountability across the system. As the fiscal cliff approaches, the RTA is advocating for sustainable funding and meaningful reform this year. The RTA does not support the MMA, which is the Metropolitan Mobility Authority, the idea of crashing all the boards together. But we are advocating for a stronger central regional entity to enhance service and increase efficiency and accountability. And some of the proposed reforms include RTA setting regional service standards for each mode to ensure all residents have access to a baseline level of transit service. RTA setting a regional fare policy to make fares more seamless and affordable. And Director Drwinski was talking about progress already being made in that space. Greater regional oversight on capital project prioritization, including critical electrification efforts across the system. Consolidation of similar job functions across the system to streamline the organizational structure and produce cost savings, and a review of the board seats to ensure regionally balanced decision-making. Each of these reforms that I just described was featured in CMAP's plan of action for regional transit, which was the part report that Mayor Schilke referenced earlier. We look forward to continued discussion with legislators, local elected officials, and riders, and to chart a sustainable path forward for the system that increases access and improves reliability for all the region's residents. And maybe just one other point. I don't know if you had the chance to see it. There was a Senate hearing on transportation a couple of weeks ago, at which each of the service boards directors sat, as well as our chairman Dillard. And this issue, this concern about collaboration, if you watch that Senate hearing, you'll see there is no issue with collaboration across the service boards today. They work very well together. That is probably a relic from the past when maybe they didn't work as well. But today we have very good participation, collaboration across the service boards. So the idea that that will be improved by merging everyone together, I just don't see the value. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Chris. All right, moving on. We have Senator DeWitt, who has joined us online. He is a part of the Senate Transportation Committee. Sir, are you the vice chair, I believe? And I do have a slide that shows the upcoming Senate hearings. There is one for Kane County. Specifically, it's going to be at Elgin Community College, but I'll let him go ahead and make his remarks and we can talk about that after. Go ahead, Senator.
Very good, Jackie. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Very good. Thank you. Madam Chair and Director Forbes, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your board, county board this afternoon. Welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. You've got a long meeting going on here. I'm going to try to be very brief. Just for a little bit of background, as some of you may recall, I did represent Kane County on the RTA board between 2013 and 2018. I found it to be a very rewarding experience and really gave me a perspective on just what regional transportation really means here in the Chicago metropolitan area. So as we have kind of entered into this new realm of what I like to describe as a regurgitation of the RTA organization, there are a handful of issues that I have grave concerns about. As Jackie mentioned in her a very concise presentation of the CMAP part report, there is legislation that has in fact been proposed regarding moving forward with some of these recommendations. Unfortunately, they've chosen some recommendations that, as Mayor Schilke represented, will give particular power to one particular component of this RTA system, that being Cook County and the city of Chicago. And I believe that is something that out here in the suburbs, where we generate close to 45% of the entire sales tax revenue stream, as long as fare box revenue to the RTA system, we need to make sure that does not happen. Jackie mentioned the board makeup. The legislation proposed does in fact want to eliminate the existing 3 service boards. What they seem to be forgetting is that the second recommendation as far as a reorganization did include maintaining the 3 service boards, but giving full authority over those 3 boards to a new empowered RTA oversight committee, or MMA committee, whatever you want to call it. And I think Director Dewinski described it best. You know, the CTA and Metra both are in the train business, but they operate in very different business models. Pace Bus and CTA both operate bus systems, but they both operate in very different business models. I think it's important that all of those service models stay intact so that they can advise a newly empowered RTA board with the operations of each of their systems, and then give the RTA the authority to be able to have full oversight over the entire system. The subject of fares came up a little bit ago. Currently, as you all know, the 3 service boards, Metra, CTA, and PACE, all operate in a silo amongst themselves. And I can't think up of a better example of what that can do to the current system, the difficulties it can create. Jim Derwinski just mentioned the entire fare restructuring process, A, that they have currently gone through, but B, fare processes they've gone through in the past that has paid attention to the revenue side of their particular service model. The CTA hasn't reviewed fares or revised fares since 2018. Now, there sure hasn't been much that's gone on in our world since 2018, other than the fact that our world turned inside out or upside down, whatever gyration description you want to put on it. But the fact that they have not touched their fare structure since 2018, to me, represents a significant lapse in fiscal responsibility. And oh, by the way, before that, the last time they revised fares was 2009. I cannot believe that that has done any kind of a fair, equitable, or concise job of controlling their finances within the CTA system, which, by the way, does absorb a majority of the RTA budget on the annual basis. The second item I'm extremely concerned about is revenue sources. Some of those have been talked about today. There's discussion in the current legislation about raising fares. There's discussion about taking tollway revenue from the Illinois Tollway Authority and using some of those funds for mass transit. The subject of a congestion tax came up earlier. I appreciated the county board member's question. Not only are they talking about a congestion tax on our roads, they're also talking about a congestion tax that could take place for anybody who chooses to drive into the loop on a daily basis. Now, some people, because of their jobs, they have to drive in every day. Sometimes they have multiple stops. But there are other businesses like Lyft and Uber who currently operate within the Chicago loop on a daily basis that frankly do contribute to the traffic congestion within the loop on a regular basis. They're talking about putting a tax on the Uber and Lyft system. The problem with all of those is I believe they all fall onto the backs of fare riders. They all fall onto the backs of taxpayers. Jackie showed the table out of the part report that showed the breakdown in revenues of the 6 largest mass transit systems in the state. And I'm sorry to report that the state of Illinois is dead last in the amount of state funding they contribute to Chicago's mass transit system. And the only component within the Illinois revenue structure worse than the state is our federal contingent, who either can't seem to find the funding to help fund mass transit in Illinois. I'm not sure why they can't find the funding. And there are other agencies across the country, Philadelphia and New York come to mind, where federal and state funding approach 30, 40, and 50% of their entire revenue streams. One of the things I'm going to be talking to CMAP about, I'm not sure there's anybody on the call today from CMAP, but one of the things I'd like to talk to them about is how do those other states, how are they able to come up with enough state revenue to fund mass transit? A, either they've chosen to make mass transit a priority in their budget process, or B, they're using other funding available that maybe we haven't looked at yet. And I think that's some of the deep dive and the bigger thought process that Director Dewinski mentioned. I think those are the highlights, Madam Chair and Director Forbes, that I'm watching as this public hearing process moves forward. Jackie, as you mentioned, there are a series of public hearings being held on a county by county basis. The first one was held, in fact, in Chicago a couple weeks ago. The next hearing is actually tomorrow down in Palos Park to cover the southern suburbs of Southern Cook County. And yes, there is in fact a meeting scheduled that is tentatively scheduled at ECC on August 28th, I believe. So we will look forward to those upcoming hearings. I would also add that I applaud my counterpart on the Transportation Committee, Ron Villivalam. I actually made the suggestion we needed to take these county by county so everybody can have an opportunity to present their concerns and issues depending on their given county and municipal situation. So in the spirit of brevity, I will cut short there, Jackie. And again, happy to answer any questions anybody might have. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Senator. Well done. I think
Thank
we have
you.
one more speaker.
Yeah, we have one more speaker. I just wanted to mention here are the Senate hearing information. We don't have the exact location at Elgin Community College, but we will share that as soon as we have that for you. So our last speakers are from McGuire Woods. We've got Greg Bales and James Sherwood on the line. I wanted to show you this slide. These are the bills that have been introduced in the General Assembly. You'll see the representative and senator who have submitted them there on the screen, and you have links to those bills if you wanted to read through them. I want to let you know that the House bills have been referred to the Rules Committee, and the Senate bills have been referred to the Assignments Committee. They did say that they submitted these bills as a starting point for discussion. So it is, things are still under discussion. So the McGuire Woods team will have a few words to say. They're listening to you. They want to hear what your concerns are and thoughts and questions. So I'll turn it over to them now.
Hi, good evening. This is James Sherwood with McGuire Woods. I'll kick it off quickly and then hand it over to my colleague, Greg. I apologize for not being on video this evening. I can keep this very brief. I know this has gone over time and a lot of the previous speakers covered this issue very well. I will just say that I've been in communication with Senator DeWitt throughout the past few months, and he's really doing a great job of representing the county along with our other members of the Springfield delegation. We are really well positioned on this issue. This is still very early in the process. As you just indicated, the bills up on the slide are starting points, and I expect this language will evolve and change many different times throughout the course of the next 6 to 12 or maybe even 18 months. In terms of timing, that's really up in the air. There have been some discussions that this could potentially get called for a vote in the lame duck session, which will be early January of 2025. As Senator DeWitt mentioned, the revenue portion of this bill is going to be very controversial, and that's going to be a difficult vote. for a lot of the different members of the legislature, whether it's a congestion tax or a fare increase. Those are some unpopular and difficult votes for members to take, and a lame duck session can make it easier for outgoing members to vote for a fee increase. But honestly, I just personally don't see the legislative package coming together in that small amount of time. As we all know, this is a huge issue. There are a lot of moving parts here. I think some opposition will come out, maybe even from organized labor. It's worried about a downsizing of some jobs. So realistically, I would expect that this will get pushed to the spring session of 2025. And as Senator DeWitt mentioned, Senator Villavala and Representative Delgado, who are kind of leading the conversation for each chamber, they want to make sure that this is a transparent process, that there are robust discussions all over the state. So I hope and I don't think that the legislature is going to rush into anything, but you never know. If things come together this fall, we could see a vote early in 2025. But yeah, I think one of the big things that I'm looking for is I have heard rumblings behind the scenes that there is pushback from labor in the labor community. Anytime you have various agencies that are potentially combining into a single unit, you are going to have job loss. And at that point, you are going to have concern from the labor community. And as we know in Illinois, they could definitely slow this down if they wanted to. But all in all, I think everyone realizes the urgency here with the funding cliff. I think people are trying to work towards a compromise that works for everybody, including the agencies and the riders. And I do expect this will get done. But just want to stress this is very early in the process. And I think that this is going to change and evolve quite a bit over time here as we get into further discussions. But yeah, that's a high level overview. I don't know, Greg, if you have anything else to add.
No additions to that. Thank you. And for context for some in the audience, both James and I are lobbyists for the county, both in Springfield and Washington. So we are closely monitoring this legislation, particularly as the hearings are occurring throughout Illinois.
Thank you both.
All right, moving on to questions.
Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Tepe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sometimes I get confused, but part of my philosophy is that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the two things I heard here that concerned me that should be addressed is one, each organization has its own way of ridership paying. Okay, that needs to be addressed and make it easier for the riders. So why should there be three different ways of paying? And second, it sounds to me like this would give the primary control to the CTA in the city of Chicago. Whereas right now, all of this is addressing the fact that there's a lot of regional ridership and tremendous thoughts are being put into ways to make that more effective for those that live farther away. So those are the two things that I just don't understand. Where am I missing it?
Would any of you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I can start on the pay piece. Ventra actually is a platform that goes across all three agencies. 83% of our ridership does use Ventra. For those that choose not to, they can still buy a fare product through either ticket vending machine or on board. So there is there is different price points, but there is one mechanism. And under the Regional Connect Pass, when that rolls out later this year, it'll be mobile. On the mobile so that it can be tracked and paid in the background. But it'll be the first time we've had a day pass that way. Currently today, you can buy a Metra monthly ticket, and for 30 extra bucks, you can get a Regional Connect Pass, which will give you access to the entire network for an entire month. So whatever the Metra monthly is, whatever zone you're in, plus 30, that's been out well over a year already as well.
So the way to solve that is to get all three organizations to work together.
If it's not broke, we don't fix it.
Well, and I would actually think you're not missing anything. Again, Redden, RTA. So I would say, I don't think you are missing anything. I think you're actually pretty spot on and being pretty astute, there are some things that could be improved. And I think we all acknowledge those, the fare policy and sort of some of that further, which they've all pointed, Melinda can speak to it too. Everyone's actually evolving, but a lot of this comes down to money, time, technology, and money. And we want to continue to do all of that. There are future improvements that could be made, but, merging everyone into one super organization doesn't necessarily get us there. And I think that that's why we're all speaking to continued additional funding with some of those specific things that could be done. We could do more of or do a better job at. Fares is one of those examples. So I think you're pretty spot on in your assessment.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Silva, I represent the northeast side of Aurora. We have lost routes pace in my district. And I've spoken against that before, but I really appreciated Senator DeWitt's remarks. And the reason I asked the question about congestion taxes, if you will, is that, and I know this is the $1 million question, but I really believe that we have to look for alternative sources and not fund this on the taxpayers' money, because we have single parents, we have formerly incarcerated individuals who are trying to get to their areas of resources and don't have transportation. So many kids trying to get to school. I don't mean to be redundant, but so many reasons to not fund this on the backs of the people who need it most. So I appreciate that that's being looked at, and I want to encourage us to do an even better job of coming up with resources that don't entail funding this on the backs of the people who need it most. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Mr. Roth? No? I have a question. Since the rail lines are owned by the rail industries, why? I know it's legacy. I know it's legacy. All right, get that. They put in the sweat equity and got the right of way, et cetera. But in this day and age, why?
Yeah, the acquisition costs. So I've often spoke about one of the solutions in Chicago. If you look at the map of all the rail stuff, it's a spaghetti noodle. It is horrible. It's probably the worst in the world when it comes to congestion. We operate with what we call in the sector 1,500 trains a day and 43 grade to grade crossings. That's where one railroad has to wait, like at a red light, for a 3-mile long car to go in front of it. And that can take up to 40 minutes and block everything. So the point, yeah, exactly. It's funding. To buy and get, permanent access to some of these lines, today it's in the tens of billions per line. The amount of money that the class 1 railroads are worth, it is astronomical. So they have a right under federal law to have their access protected, and they have an ability to allow us access, but they do not actually even have to allow us access.
And what percentage of your budget goes into paying for use of those lines?
So I'd have to get you a number on that. So I could give you it costs $225 million to run the 3 UP lines, but you have to pull out of that the fuel, the labor cost, the maintenance cost, and then you eventually get to the cost to run on the lines. But that's just in our $1 billion budget, it's about 225 just for the 3 UP lines.
Okay. And one more question. Are you affiliated or going to be affiliated, or are you talking to Amtrak to have that kind of regional fare so that we can come here, if we can take our Metro and catch an Amtrak, and Amtrak can take us to wherever on one fare?
So
I can't speak exactly why Amtrak does what Amtrak does. We did have discussions with them, specifically with Congressman Lipinski many years ago, talking about the run to Joliet and how Amtrak had ample seating to run to Joliet. It was a midday run, our Heritage Quarters.
Milwaukee.
Yes.
Rockford.
Amtrak says absolutely get on our train at their price. So if their price is $35 and our price is $8, then people make those decisions. But Amtrak has not been, and I think, and just to speak in general, I think that's one of the biggest problems with passenger rail. It comes with a heavy subsidy. That's why all the freight railroads shed all their passenger obligations in the early 70s. All but one in the country did that. When Amtrak was formed, there was only one publicly funded railroad, and that was Pennsylvania. So there's always been this never-ending burden of you got to protect that revenue stream because it's the other side of the funding equation. And so I think most people, that's been the biggest impediment. And as we raised our fares so much over those years, we can clearly see we've pushed people off the system. So that's why I'm so grateful right now that we've had a good caliber reset and we're trying to attract a lot of new people back at a reasonable price point, at least for 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Historical comment.
And, but before we go to a historical comment, I'd like to be remiss if I did not recognize Representative Matt Hansen, who's in the room. Matt, thank you so much for attending. We appreciate you being here. So, yes, sir.
I just, Shep Rose, State's Attorney's Office. As to the question of municipal ownership, if you read about the history of the rapid transit in Chicago for about 75 years, well, no, quite not that long, but maybe for about 50 years, that was, pun intended, the third rail of city politics. All virtually every year, the private transit companies that owned basically the elevated lines, including Mr. Yerkes, who came here from London, every year somebody would introduce a municipal ownership bill in the city council, which would then spark a remarkably fast and high-priced campaign contributions to the aldermen to make sure that that bill went nowhere. And that was an issue in municipal elections. A really good book about that is a book by the reporters Wenton Kogan called Lords of the Levee. And it's pretty fascinating, but it took years and years. And as Mr. Director Drewinski says, right now, the laws of eminent domain, never mind the federal laws about the railroad right-of-ways, would make it, I would think, an almost insurmountable and costly process to condemn and acquire
Eminent domain.
eminent domain.
All right, well, Jackie, what are the next steps for the board now, since they've had the opportunity to hear this and perhaps they'll find it in their schedule to attend the meeting that's going to take place on August 28th? What expectations do we as a board anticipate having in guiding this process along?
Yeah, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me. I can get information from our good friends who are here today, who are truly the experts. If you want to do testimony in person at those hearings, you're welcome to go in person. You can also submit written testimony. This time I haven't, there are different subject matters for each of the hearings. The one in Kane County is around public health. So I am going to reach out to Director Michael Isaacson and let him know if he wanted to make any comments about it, that's coming up next month. So yeah, just feel free to kind of process all of this. If you have questions, reach out to me and I can get those answers for you, and any other ways that you want to reach out to our local elected officials and let them know what you're thinking, you're free to do that as well.
And we're anticipating that these bills, in whatever form they're going to be presented, it's going to be all of next year. You're looking to get this thing done by next year, are you not? Because of the cliff?
Yeah, I believe that's what they said. I don't know. Rob, do you want to jump in as the government affairs person? Leah.
Yeah, I think those bills exist. There might be new bills, different bills that could come forward too. But I think that the timing is very important point. At this time next year, you know, we were in our budget process is calendar year, and we have to have our regional with the 3 service boards balanced budgets put together essentially by October. Each year, you probably have seen a collection of us come and talk to you every sort of November, December timeframe. We'll be back. And if anyone's been listening, we've been saying this fiscal cliff is coming in 2026. And so the point being, you've got to back up from there. And so 2025 is the year where we really have to have answers to those questions of what those funding options might be. Otherwise, and I don't mean to sound sort of hair on fire, but the budget process for what will be the 2026 budget will have to be massive service cuts and fare increases. And I don't think that's a path any of us want to go down. It's not good for anybody's region, anybody's residents, anybody's economy. And we're sort of trying to sound that alarm for a future crisis. And but that timing is important, that even though it's 2026, the work really has to occur in 2025 in terms of what those solutions might look like.
All right, so we will invite our members of the service board and our lobbyist early next year again, to come by and guide us. If there's to be letters of support, if we're going to be passing a countywide resolution on what this board feels would be most appropriate, we'll seek your advice and your counsel on what our next steps are to support you. So if there's no other questions, we do not have a quorum. We will not be able to once again vote upon our minutes. We'll have a book by the time we're ready to have that. I'm being sarcastic, but we'll eventually get to that vote. Francis, thank you for staying. I hope you thought the meeting was interesting. Yeah, good. And with that, may I have a motion to close our meeting?
Roth will second.
Thank you. We don't need a vote on that, so everybody have a great day. Good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Then you're safe. Thank you.
They were, okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, animals and move them.
I mean, it's always good to